Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is George and I'm joined by David. And today
Hello.
we are going to be talking about optimizing your at-home video conferencing setup. And obviously this is a huge topic right now in the current age we find ourselves in. So I see a lot of people still trickling in, so we'll just wait a few moments until everyone joins us, but feel free to say hi in the chat. Also, feel free to weigh in on the polls that we will be putting up. There is one up now asking what sector you work in. And please respond in the actual poll section, not in chat. In some of our previous webinars, we've had people responding in chat. Just open up the polls panel and weigh in there, and we'll announce those polls as we roll them out throughout today's webinar. There's also a Q&A panel, so feel free to submit questions there, and we will get to those later in the webinar. But so far, I see people from all over the place here. Yeah, people from New Jersey, people from Norway, people from Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, Mexico, Wisconsin, Germany, Chicago, Poland. So people from all over the world, Vancouver, Canada. So yeah, this is great to see. And of course, I think one of the reasons why we're seeing people from all over the world, from every corner of the globe, tuning in for subjects like this is because this is really important right now and potentially going forward, which we're going to touch on. All right. Let's see. So just going to wait another moment here for a few more people to join us as people are still trickling in a little bit. But how are you doing today so far, Dave?
Oh, doing well. Doing well today. I think we got a good bunch of content to get through here today, and hopefully we'll get lots of questions coming up in the question section.
Absolutely.
Should be able to get started pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm starting to see our numbers stabilize a little bit. That's usually my sign that it's time to kick things off and get going. Yep. So we're going to do that here momentarily. So once again, welcome everyone to today's webinar. The subject today is optimizing your at-home video conferencing setup. And there's a lot of ways to do this, and we're going to focus on sort of the common top ways, maybe the three main styles of doing it and how you can kind of make the best of those, and share a little bit about what we're doing ourselves personally, and some of the ways that you can leverage various tools, including ones you may already have, to make the best of maybe a less than ideal situation. So again, make sure to throw your questions and comments into chat, into the Q&A panel, weigh on in the polls when we put those up. But let's get started. Let's jump right in. So optimizing it. The main agenda here today is we're going to start with why you might want to invest in your home video conferencing setup. What's the value in doing that? The second part will be the three setups to try and achieve the best results, the most professional video calls that you can. The third part will be tips for optimizing all of that and improving the environment overall in which you're presenting yourself on those calls. And then fourth, we'll get to your Q&A. So let's jump right into the first section. Why should you invest in your video conferencing setup? So looking at this, and Dave, I think you probably have some great insights on this, especially very recently in the news, especially here in Canada and honestly around North America. We've seen quite a lot of chatter from big tech companies coming out of the current COVID situations, where everyone was kind of forced to work from home, and that was easier for some than others, and certainly those in the tech field that was much easier, including ourselves here at Epiphan. But many other big tech giants, the Shopify, Facebook, Twitter, the Microsofts, the Googles, all those kind of guys, Apple and so on, have all talked about what they've done currently, but some of them have been very upfront about where they see this going forward as well.
Yeah, and I think we, as you mentioned, the tech guys were the most vocal about it and probably the first to switch. But we really expect there are always some industries where it's much more difficult for people to work separately, but there are many where it's going to work very well. And I think had this been, kind of a very short-lived pandemic, 3-4 weeks, people would have kind of got through it and moved on and fallen right back into old patterns. But it's persisted long enough that people have kind of needed to figure out how to make it work well. And now that they have, they're kind of going, hey, this works really well. What's the motivation to go back? And so I think, there's all kinds of industries that traditionally are coming to an office that maybe won't be doing that, or at least won't be doing that quite so much going forward. And I think we'll see a lot more of this kind of hybrid world where, yes, there's an office you can go to, but on any one given day, there'll only be a fraction of the employees actually there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the work from home, even after the pandemic, has been announced by many of these companies. And, Shopify even quoting in their tweet, office centricity is over.
Yeah.
And for them, that might be true, although I don't think it will be 100%. I think it will be, like you say, a hybrid mixed environment. So I think, maybe that type of quote isn't quite literal in that no one will have offices again. I don't think that that's a thing. I think that the idea of it being the central hub is going to step back a little bit, as people have discovered. I've been speaking not only to other tech companies, but I've been speaking to government workers. Obviously, here in Ottawa, Canada, we're the seat of government here in Canada, and so a huge portion of the workers in this city work for the government. And I've spoken to many of those, and many of those departments have just now realized that, wait a second, this is actually working really well, and they're working from home, and it's working, and why go back? And that might be beneficial. And I think the flip side to this, we've seen it, and I think government employees have commented it, and I suspect Shopify has seen this as well, that things have actually gone up. Productivity has increased, which I think no one was really expecting. And that might be one of the reasons why we're looking at this hybrid solution of working from home even after this pandemic is over. That's the reason why you might want to invest in your home setups.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty obvious that, even after this pandemic is over, some of this kind of work at home environment is going to persist, or at least could well persist, depending on your own, company's policy. But certainly we see many companies saying, okay, this is a turning point. We are going to be much more open to the work at home. And some might even be, I would say, beyond encouraging it, really almost enforcing it and saying a certain number of days you're going to work at home.
Yeah.
So it really, it pays to get a good, comfortable setup that gives you good results if you're going to be spending more time there. If it's not just a temporary thing to get you through a few weeks, then it is time to kind of look at what you can do to your environment and how to improve it, both from a comfort point of view and a kind of image and performance kind of view.
Yeah. So this was the tweet from Toby
Yeah.
at Shopify last week. As of today, Shopify is a digital by default company. We will keep our offices closed until 2021 so we can rework them for this new reality. After that, most will permanently work from home. Office centricity is over, period, full stop. And I actually applaud Toby at Shopify for being very open and public about all of this. Many other tech companies, big tech companies, have said exactly this behind closed doors. They're just not saying it publicly. And I'm not going to out what those companies and who they are, but so I do applaud him for being honest and open about this, and appreciate that. And even when it started, they allowed a modest budget for employees to improve their home, and I hope that more employers will do the same to improve people's home environments for exactly this. But if you do have to invest your own, you want to invest it wisely, and that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today. And investing that is huge. So optimizing it, making sure we're doing the best we can without going nuts. I mean, you could spend a ridiculous amount of money on this, and hey, if the company's paying for it, maybe that's all right. But chances are it won't be. It'll be a mix. It'll be a supplement. So you want to make sure that we're choosing the right setup for the right environment and getting it to be the best we can be, because we might be doing this for quite a while. So now's the time to optimize your at-home setup. So that kind of breaks down into two main things: the gear and the environment. So the gear, that can be the video and audio equipment. You may already have some of this. You may need to invest in some of this. The environment, this is your physical space. And that can be a big variable. And we'll
Yeah.
dive into that. And there's a lot of things you can do there, and those don't have to be expensive, but something you want to think about, maybe more than the gear itself, I would say. And we'll talk about, inevitably it's going to come up in the questions about Dave, what you and I are doing, and we will definitely address that so that you guys understand some of the things we've done and the way that we've addressed it. So what are the kind of three setups, if you want to kind of guide us through some of these?
Sure. So yeah, we labeled them serviceable, decent, and professional. And really this gets to, not only cost but effort in kind of setting up your environment. And so I would say, the serviceable we define as the absolute minimum. You need a certain amount of gear. It's not much, but you need something to get started. So that's the other thing, is a lot of people maybe at work they were using desktops, and at home you need at least a desktop or a laptop or something. And whether that is going to be your own personal device or whether that's going to be supplied by the company, I expect a lot of companies will be investing more in laptops and having people at home working from those. But that's what you need just to get started. Decent kind of adds some additions to get the quality up a little bit of the video calls, both in terms of audio and in terms of the video signal itself. And then professional kind of moves to that next level where you say, okay, I'm doing this a lot, or I'm in a sales oriented role. This is not me just chatting with colleagues. I want to really create a really good impression. I want to have high quality audio and video on these conference calls. And so we'll recommend some things for both the environment and gear wise to get into that category as well.
Yeah, so we're going to break these down a little more individually, but I did just want to mention we do have a poll up there as well, asking the question: what will your employers work from home look like going forward? Do you know? Has that been decided? Or is that still unknown? So weigh in on that poll. I'm really interested to hear what that is, and we'll kind of start to break these down. So as Dave was saying, the serviceable, the basics. You're going to want a laptop or a computer that has a built-in webcam, and a microphone. I mean, that's the most basic. In some cases, you could even use an iPad or smartphone in place of these. But usually, especially if you're doing presentations, you're going to want some sort of computer, laptop or desktop.
Yeah.
Because usually, even though installing the apps on your smartphone or your iPad or tablet, they're great. They can be portable. They can be nice. You can set them up pretty much anywhere. They're usually not the best for simultaneously doing sharing. When you have a laptop or a computer, then you start to open up possibilities with multiple monitors and doing all kinds of things, and just being able to multitask, which phones and tablets really just don't do. So this is your basic serviceable. You get your laptop, it has the built-in webcam, you point it at your face, and you go. I mean, it doesn't get more basic than that. The built-in microphones, if your laptop has a built-in camera, it has a built-in microphone as well. The majority of laptops today have a built-in camera. There's a few exceptions, but the majority of them have a built-in camera. You might need to take that piece of tape off of it that you stuck on there years ago for privacy, because now you actually have to use it, but it's probably there. The decent setup, this is where we kind of, maybe we're using that same computer, that same laptop, but we want to kind of upgrade it a bit. We want to improve the look of things. One of the downsides of built-in webcams is they're usually not the best quality. They usually don't have the best angles. They're not the greatest at variable lighting conditions, and so on and so on. There's usually no adjustments for them. So when we go to an external webcam, USB, which means we can plug it into our laptop or our computer very easily. Can even move it from different devices very easily if we upgrade those computers. Um, so that gives us something that is going to follow along and hopefully grow as we change devices. But external webcams are also usually higher quality because they don't have to be shrunk down to these tiny pinholes to fit inside
Yeah.
the thin display of a laptop. Um, so you can get 4K, full HD, all these kind of things. Um, and then also upgrading to an external microphone is also, honestly, I would say, one of the best upgrades that you can do in the decent. You can, if you're using a laptop that has a very good built-in webcam, and although I'm not an Apple guy myself personally, I will give Apple credit that the cameras they build into their devices are some of the best on the market, without question. The Windows laptops usually have subpar webcams built into them in comparison, but microphones, regardless, the built-in ones are never that great. So looking at using an external USB microphone um, is a great upgrade to consider. That's what I'm currently using right now. I normally use a headset, which is also a great option. If you spend a decent amount of money on a good USB headset with a boom mic, that can make a huge difference to your audio as well. I'm using a larger one at the moment for these webinars, but day to day I use a headset.
Yeah, one of the advantages of going to that webcam and USB mic is to be able to separate them and basically pull them out of the laptop. So you can place the camera where you want it to have the best view of yourself and the background that you've got in the shot. And the microphone, you want the opposite. Rather than pushing the microphone back from you, you want the microphone very close. And
Yeah.
so by pulling those apart and pulling them out of the laptop, you get to place the microphone where it can do its best job, and you get to place the camera where it can do its best job. And then that leaves you free to actually use your laptop and have the screen at whatever angle you like and not worry about whether that makes the camera point at a funny angle. So really, this decent setup is as much about better quality as it is about better usability, because then you can just make sure that you can use your laptop however you want to use it. It's not, the camera is not tied to the angle that you have your screen on, and you don't have to worry about pulling it very close to you to make sure the microphone is good. Getting those things out and separated is a really good first step to getting better quality and better usability for your setup.
Absolutely. So, we've put this in the second, decent category. For myself personally, if you're really talking about making a good usable environment at home, I actually think this is probably the starting point you want to consider. And someone asked a question, is a Chromebook sufficient for basic at-home video conferencing? And that falls into the first category of serviceability. Aside from the OS not being Windows or Mac OS, it does everything else, provided that there's an app you can install in Chrome OS for whatever the remote meeting software you're using is. Obviously, Google Meet is built into a Chromebook, but if, as long as whatever the company platform of choice is, Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, or whatever, as long as you can use it on a Chromebook, that falls into the serviceability category. And yeah, that's fine. Chromebooks can also add external USB webcams as well, as long as they're UVC compliant, which is sort of the universal standard. So, that shouldn't be a problem from the basic serviceability standpoint. You may find that if you're trying to use a Chromebook as the basis for the decent setup like we have up now, you might need to be more picky on the external mic and external webcams you choose for compatibility reasons, as the majority of these are built around Windows and Mac OS. But for the most part, as long as they conform to the UVC, UAC standards, shouldn't be a problem. So there's some questions coming in, and we're definitely going to jump in there and look at those in a little later. I wanted to address the Chromecast one since it was very relevant to what we were looking at. So let's look at the professional setup. So Dave, kind of take us through these ones.
Yeah, so again, you've got your computer or laptop. And here, basically the idea is to, instead of going for a webcam, try to go for, again, an upgrade to that image. So webcams can have decent images, especially in very good lighting scenarios, but they can be less than optimal if the lighting scenario is a little challenging. And the level of control that you have with that camera is just a little less in terms of, you know, fixed focus and aperture and things. With a more professional camera, you can really lock it down, and you can have interchangeable lenses, so that if you have a couple different setups, it's very easy to choose a lens that works very well for that, or have a, you know, a zoom lens, which a lot of webcams obviously don't have. So moving up into that camera space is the next step. And for that, you're going to need something to bring that camera image into the laptop or the computer that you're using, and that's the capture card or frame grabber that we referenced there. So typically, you'll have an HDMI or an SDI or some similar kind of physical connection coming out of your camera, and then you plug that into a capture card, which will convert it to USB, and then you plug the USB into your laptop, and it behaves from the laptop's point of view, and the conferencing software that you're using behaves like a webcam, although behind that frame grabber you have a whole lot more control over what that image looks like.
Yeah, and you know, I sometimes see some comments, and this is somewhat relevant to what people are saying in chat right now. Frank was asking a question, and it kind of plays into to this a little bit. You know, people say, well, you know, if I'm going into a Zoom meeting or I'm going into a Google Meet meeting, you know, it's all being compressed, it's being scaled down, and so do I really need that higher quality camera? The reality is that whether you're doing a live stream, you're doing a recording, you're doing anything that's being compressed, starting great, even knowing that it's going to get, you know, knocked down a little bit in the compression, is still ultimately going to be better than starting with crap and compressing crap. Like, it just, starting great and compressing it is still going to look better. So it's definitely worth looking at it if you're really serious about the image quality, the flexibility, like you were saying, Dave, with lenses and zooms. Webcams only do digital zoom, which means when you zoom in with them, if you need to, they just don't look good, and then you compress on top of that and it looks even worse. Whereas if you take a mirrorless camera or DSLR, something along those lines, you're getting a fantastic image that you can tweak, whether it's aperture, white balance, ISO, all these things, all from the photography world. That, you know, if you consider yourself even a hobbyist photographer, apply those same things that when you go shopping for a camera to get the best pictures you want. It's the same application. We're just applying this to improving our look in a meeting.
Yeah, and
So looking at that.
a lot of times it comes down to the control you have over that camera as well. So it's not just the image quality, it's things like being able to fix your focus.
Yeah.
And say, I know I'm sitting in this chair, I'm not going to be running around the room. I want the focus to be exactly in this range between kind of my nose and the back of my ears. You can set that easily. And so if you move your head or there's something in the background, your camera's not going to temporarily focus on something else and then refocus on you. It just gives you that ability when you move away from a webcam to have that much more control over the image, and it just creates fewer distractions. So again, we're moving from the, you know, decent setup to the professional setup. Those are the differences. In a professional setup, people really should just be focused on what you're saying, what your facial expressions are, and they shouldn't be noticing your lighting, your camera, you know, change of focus. All that stuff should go away. You should get rid of all those distractions and present a much better image. So it's not just the pure image quality you're worried about, it's also the control over how consistent that image is, you know, over the length of a call or even from call to call. The next thing on the list is a tripod. So again, getting the camera kind of locked down in a position that is best for whatever environment you have. And there you have to kind of think about the background, what else is showing in the frame, and also what angle to your face is the camera on. And what that's, you know, when you look at the webcam setup, you can move those and put them on a tripod, but most often people will either stick them on the top of their monitor or on the top of their laptop, and often that's not exactly the angle you want. So a tripod, again, just allows you to place that camera exactly where you want it, and it's going to stay there every day. It's not going to move, and so you go into your setup every time, it looks exactly the same.
Exactly. And then, of course, again, external USB audio, whether it's the same external USB mic as the decent setup before, or whether you upgrade that to, maybe a USB preamp that has analog microphones hook up to it, or a lav mic, or there's tons of different possibilities there as well. But in general, one of the biggest things, and this kind of comes from the general rules for live streaming as well. There's no point in making great video if the audio is garbage. Video is usually more forgivable than bad audio. So you definitely want to make sure that, if you're going to the professional setup, you want to invest as much into your audio considerations as some of the others. And there's a lot of ways to do that, again, depending on your space. And we're going to look at a little bit of that. So how this might look, as an example, using an external camera with a capture card, very basic. Honestly, it's we take our HDMI or SDI, whatever the camera output is, send it into the capture card. Most capture cards you'll find today are USB based. Part of that has to do with the fact that laptops dominate the personal computing market in a huge way, and have for so long, that internal capture cards are not as common outside of the high-end professional space. Um, so getting a USB capture card like our own AVIO series, plug that into your laptop, it detects like a webcam, drop it into the software you're using, and that's pretty much it. But you're getting that super high quality image from whatever that external camera is. So we make a few different models, but the AVIO HD and the AVIO 4K are the two most popular in this space. Really, the only difference between them is the maximum input resolution they can capture, HD versus 4K. Someone asked in chat earlier, is it worth looking at 4K webcams? You could argue it's a similar question here. Is it worth looking at it? Again, you can do a lot if you start high and go down. So there might be a good argument for it. I think the 4K webcam, like the Logitech Brio, it's a great camera, but I wouldn't for a webcam, but I wouldn't say that its strength is that it does 4K. They added a bunch of other visual improvements and quality to it, just at full HD, even compared to Logitech's own C920, which is the most popular webcam in the world. You could say a similar thing here. External cameras that support 4K sometimes have better sensors, or whatever the case may be. So there's another argument to use 4K there, starting great. And even if ultimately you're not, I don't know of any online conferencing software that uses 4K. I know of very few that even do full HD. Most scale down to 720 or less. So, you're not going to be getting full 4K through to your viewers anyway.
No, but sometimes you're buying a camera for multiple purposes, and
Right.
often if you're going to do videos and post them on YouTube, whether they're training videos or those kind of things with your same setup at home, then the 4K makes a lot of sense, because you want that footage to be at 4K. You can upload it to YouTube at 4K. So strictly in the conferencing world today, things aren't 4K. So you're future proofing a little, but if you plan to use that camera for other things, that's another reason to look at some of these features like 4K, and think about what else you might be doing with that camera besides your video conferencing.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to the camera 101. And this is camera 101 for the professional setup. And there's sort of four categories to this. And I think the main thing here is, especially if you're investing out of your own pocket, make sure this is a device that can be multi-use. Otherwise, it could be a very large investment for, not all the best return. But the kind of four categories in that professional setup, and there's some flex in here, but they generally break down to the DSLR, the mirrorless camera, the Handycam camcorder style, and the PTZ camera. And I would say that fourth one is less common in the home setup, extremely common in the boardroom, conference room, in the offices. So we might see a lot more of that in the future, in this hybrid scenario where you're in the office part time. You might have to get used to using PTZ cameras in the boardroom. But at home, it's usually the top three here, partly because of size, the space, and cost. We did put up a new poll here asking the question, what type of non-webcam do you use at home? And that's really out of these four. So yeah, there's a lot to break down here. I personally like to go with the second option, the mirrorless option. That's my choice. My second choice is the camcorder choice. And maybe here's where, Dave, you and I can talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of our setups today. I'm using a mirrorless camera. Surprise, surprise. I just said that was my first choice. That's what I'm using. I'm using a Sony A5100 mirrorless camera, which has an interchangeable lens. And it's one of the most popular cameras for streamers and things like that because it's relatively inexpensive. It provides all the clean HDMI out that you would want, but provides an extremely high quality image, especially with the interchangeable lens, gives you a ton of options. I also have several other options that I could play with. Reach up for a moment to try and find one of my other ones here. This is a Panasonic Lumix G7. This is another one that I have. This is, again, a mirrorless camera, but it's a micro four thirds sensor where the Sony is an APS-C sensor. For the camera nerds, you'll know what that means. And then I also recently started experimenting with a Canon G7X Mark III. And that camera is a fixed lens, but it does have some zoom capabilities and things like that. It's not an interchangeable lens, but it does provide clean HDMI out. All these cameras have flip up or flip out screens so you can see yourself. And the little Canon is actually pretty impressive. I like it for a lot of things. It's capable of even 4K. But it's a $400 price increase over the Sony, and I'm not sure it's worth that. But that's just my opinion. Review to come later. And I think, Dave, you're doing something a little different right now.
A little bit. I've got the Panasonic camcorder style is what I'm using, and then I go from that on the HDMI out into one of our AVIO grabbers and into my laptop. So that's my setup. I have it on a tripod that's kind of behind my monitor. So I have my monitor just a few feet in front of me and then right directly behind that. So my camera is probably 4 feet away from me, which is a good, nice distance to give perspective. And of course, one of the advantages of the camcorders and usually the mirrorless is you can get zoom lenses, or there's an optical zoom, and that allows you to choose the framing that you want in the background so that you're just getting the portion of yourself and your background that you want. And so the camcorder works really well in the environment I have. I don't have a lot of choices in the room that I'm in where to put the camera, but where it is works because I can just use the optical zoom just to frame it the way I want. And I know I'm not losing a lot of quality doing that. And then I just come HDMI out. And, one of the things to be aware of in the SLR world is some will shut down. So even if they have video capability, they are more meant to shoot short segments of video, not to be streaming for an hour or an hour and a half at a time. And they don't always have a clean HDMI out. So you need to make sure that whatever camera you're looking at, that HDMI can be set to be clean, meaning there aren't any of the kind of icons and information that's displayed on the screen. You don't see your aperture and all these other things displayed on the screen. You want a nice clean image, and you want to make sure that the camera is meant to be run on AC and can run for as long as you want without either overheating or shutting down. So those are things. And the camcorders, typically just about all the camcorders are built for exactly that. So you can leave them on for a long time, run them off AC power very easily without having to invest in another adapter. A lot of the SLRs, you got to go out and buy a special AC adapter and that kind of thing. So
you need the dummy batteries.
So there are solutions, no question, for all of these cameras. You can make them all work. There's just trade-offs, both in terms of cost and complexity when you consider which one you want. But for me, a zoom lens, so I can frame it the way I want, and something with clean HDMI that stays on all day. That's what I was looking for.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't leave out here that the PTZ cameras do offer these things.
Yeah,
They have good zooms, they have good optics, you can position them, you could mount it in an awkward space. If you have a weird setup and you can't get the tripod straight in front of you, which both Dave and I have done, and you need to kind of do it and move it occasionally, PTZ cameras can give you some flexibility, but they're expensive. I mean, you're talking typically starting at around $1,500 for a good PTZ camera and going up very
right.
quickly from there.
Yeah,
If you want to get into the huge brands like Sony and Panasonic PTZ cameras, you're approaching 3 grand, and that's a big pill to swallow for your home setup. Where getting some of the mirrorless stuff we've talked about, or even entry level camcorders for two, three, four, $500 is very easy. So that's another reason I would say those middle two, mirrorless and camcorder, are the ones you might want to consider at first. The DSLRs, Dave mentioned, they have these shutdown things. Both of us experimented with Nikon DSLRs that we own personally, and yeah, the mirrors lift, they shut down, they don't run forever. And most mirrored DSLR, traditional body mirrored DSLRs, will do that. Very, very few don't have an auto shutdown mirror lift. And
yeah,
so that's really where we see the rise of the mirrorless.
yeah. And when you're starting to consider again what else you might do with these cameras outside of your conferencing, that's where those mirrorless and handycam style cameras, you can use them for all kinds of things, not just your video conferencing. So a multi-purpose kind of camera, really those top three are a better choice than the PTZ, which you're really only going to use,
You're going to stick
for
it on
your
a wall and never move it again.
exactly. And if that's what you need, that's great. But
Yeah.
it is more expensive and it's less kind of universal. So you really got to think if that's the choice for you.
Yeah. That being said, there was someone who asked a question earlier. Daryl was asking, producing more professional video and audio experience in their church with online streaming. Not necessarily in line with the subject we're talking about today, Daryl, but I do see that, we can reach out to you later. But just as a quick side note, that environment is actually one where you probably do want to look at PTZ cameras, where you're shooting in a church or a larger space, and want to have a fixed mounted camera. We did just put up a new poll asking, what category does your current at-home conferencing setup fall into? So weigh on the poll panel there, and let us know where you feel you're currently at. So the next part we want to look at is optimizing your call environment. And this is a pretty big one as well. So we've decided, hopefully, that we want to go to the pro level of our setup. We want to have great audio. We want to have good video. We've invested, a decent amount of money there. But now that we have this great video, if we're shooting a bad environment, it's going to show even more. So there's a lot of considerations there as well.
So here you want to be able to, think about your background, think about your lighting. What environment do you have to place that camera in? Wardrobe is another one. So there are some patterns and stripes and things on fabrics that you just want to avoid because they cause problems when they are compressed, as is going to happen over the conferencing link. So, and then audio, as we talked about, and also noise in your environment. So in a lot of cases, when you're working at home, they weren't designed to be offices. And so you do have, you have furnaces going, you have maybe pets in your environment. You've maybe got children running around.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things. And even outdoors sounds, neighbors firing up their lawnmower in the middle of the day, or all these
That
kinds of
was
so,
that was my day yesterday.
so there's a lot of things to consider, and having the best microphone in the world and the best camera in the world is not gonna mitigate these things. You need to do some extra things to mitigate the problems that your background and your lighting and your wardrobe can cause. So
Yeah.
we'll look at these in a little more detail.
Yeah, so we want to consider what's in our frame, and we borrowed this image from a news report from CBC News here in Canada. They were talking about examples of things that can go wrong, and really considering if you're doing this for work, your employer is seeing this, and think about that. So you don't want to be the guy in the top left, the no pants guy who's in a business call here, who decided to show up in just his boxers and stand up. You don't want to be that guy. So the wardrobe is important. He's also wearing a hat indoors. Is that really the most professional look? If I wore a hat indoors when I was a kid, my grandparents would have smacked me upside the head. And so things to consider. Just because you're at home doesn't mean you don't have to be professional and present professionally. Some of the other things I might nitpick here, top right, that guy's clearly using a built-in webcam on his laptop. The angle sucks. The lighting sucks. It looks a mess. And his background's not great either. He's got stairs. If he had kids running up and down the stairs, right, that would be all not only visually distracting, but noise. He's using a headset for listening, but not a boom mic, which means he's probably using the microphone in his laptop. So not the greatest audio quality. At the same time, lower left, we see a guy who's a music guy very clearly based on his background, but the background looks good. He has some set dressing, but we can also see a pop filter on the left-hand side, which means he's using an external microphone. Being a music guy, I'm going to guess that's a high quality analog mic that he's running into some sort of preamp that he has going on. And then on the lower right, we have, again, fairly average, probably the laptop webcam. They're using earbuds. They're probably using the mic on the earbud wire. That's actually a step up from the built-in microphone, but still not great, especially for someone with long hair, because it's going to rub. So that's my critique of this example. But these are great examples. We get out calls every day, and anyone who's doing this right now, this shot probably looks very familiar. And if you're talking about a casual call, casual meeting internal to your company, you could probably get away with these things. It's not that big of a deal. But if this is an external call, and maybe it's a sales call, maybe it's a presentation, maybe it's a webinar, these are not acceptable from a professional standpoint, and you probably want to look at doing some upgrades there. So just wanted to pick on those people as if they hadn't been picked on enough in the news. So some of the things we want to look at, what's in your frame. We don't want to see clutter, distracting decor, doors. A number of years ago, there was that famous clip again from the news of a guy who was being interviewed over Skype. He's wearing suit and tie, trying to look super professional in his home office that doubled as a spare bedroom. But the door was in the background, and his kids came bursting through the door, and all this chaos. And it became one of the biggest, kind of memes coming out of this stuff. That's the prime example of why you don't want doors in the background, because maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your significant other comes through that door. And we've seen a lot of examples recently of significant others walking in there, definitely not lined up with the wardrobe recommendations. You don't want that. So what we do want is maybe a solid background or a virtual background if you're using software like Zoom that allows virtual backgrounds. And so actually that's a great example. I am using a virtual background, and I'll reveal what it actually looks like here in a second. But Dave, maybe tell us about yours first.
Yeah, so mine's very simple. There's a wall behind me where I've tacked up some gray paper. So I've just got some gray photo paper and just literally pinned it to my wall. And then carefully chosen the angle and the framing so that you don't see the rest of the wall and all of the other kind of stuff that's in this room. So I've just set it up so that I really only need, I don't know, maybe 8 feet of kind of laterally on the wall and maybe 4 feet vertically. That's got the paper on it. That's where I aim the camera at. And then all the rest of the clutter and stuff in this room is not on frame. So that's how I simplified mine. I didn't want to go to anything fancy. I just took a piece of paper, tacked it to the wall, and I was done. So it's a 5-minute job.
Exactly. Now, for me, I made the small investment of purchasing a green screen, and this is actually a small investment. You can get green screen cloth off of Amazon for about $20. You can hang it on the wall. The downside is you then need to be much more conscious of your lighting, which we're going to get to. But just as an example, because I do have multiple cameras set up and I am running it through a switcher, I could play around with things a little bit more. But I could use a more practical set background. This is actually keying in the shot from my other camera. But this is maybe too revealing. This is maybe not what I want to show in a professional call. It's great to reveal who I am, and I might want to show it internally, but it doesn't show well from a professional standpoint. So using the green screen means I can add virtual backgrounds. So with virtual backgrounds, I can also tailor it. So I'm using this one, which is actually a picture from our old studio space in our office, but I could change that. Maybe I want to pretend I'm sitting at our trade show booth. Maybe I just want a colored gradient with a logo behind me, which is ultimately going to be maybe the most professional way if I was doing a sales call or something like that. But if you really want to, there's ways of showing your personality at the same time if you want to play around with different unique backgrounds. The advantage again with the green screen, whether you're doing it in Zoom, which allows you to do chroma keying with virtual backgrounds, which is usually what I do, or whether it's something else. There's lots of options there, and there's lots of ways of leveraging chroma keying if you're using different devices. And we don't want to go too deep into that today, but there are ways of really kind of upping that game. So yeah, those are things to consider. The Zoom virtual background thing is actually kind of cool. Not everyone can do that, partially because not all software allows you to do that. Skype does a virtual background blurring effect, which is great. That's a good step. Doesn't work with all cameras, I don't think, in Skype. Google Meet currently does nothing, but they've said they're planning on rolling out a background blur. Just don't know when. I'm honestly not sure about Microsoft Teams, even though they've become extremely popular. I haven't checked to see what options it has. But, all things considered, talking about Zoom, and obviously everyone's been talking about Zoom. I think for me, one of the reasons I might choose Zoom over those other platforms is actually only because of the virtual background. I think the rest of what Zoom does is exactly the same as what everyone else does, with that being the exception, that it has built-in very good keyer for virtual background. So that's again something you might want to consider if you're still trying to decide on a meeting platform and these are the things you're talking about and looking at. That might be a strong argument for Zoom. So let's see. So yeah, think about that. I mean, honestly, if I really wanted to, and I didn't even want to, play around with, some of the things, I could turn off my my chroma keying here entirely, right? I could get away with just this if I wanted to. This would be totally reasonable for me to just not have a virtual background at all and just have a solid thing. And not only can you get chroma key green backdrops, you could use curtains that you could buy cheap. You could there's lots of cloth that's like fake bricks and all kinds of things that you could play around with. So all things to consider. The other one, especially if you're going to look at chroma keying, is lighting. And Dave, you're more of an expert on this than I am, so I'll let you kind of dive in on this a little more.
Yeah, well, the slide we have up here has got some really nice lighting going on. So, I mean, this is not an inexpensive setup, and he's got quite a bit of space to work with. But if you do have that kind of space, then getting these larger sources, meaning big soft boxes, they call them, provides really nice, flattering, soft light. So it's a great option. It's not a terribly inexpensive one, but there are other ways to get something similar. You can take a more hard light source, like just a light bulb, and reflect it off a white wall, or reflect it off a large piece of white foam core or something like that, to get a similar effect where it softens the light and spreads it out to be more even and less direct. So you want some directionality to the light, but you don't want it to be, too harsh and too directional. So those large soft boxes you see in the background of this image, they're there just to really diffuse that light and soften it up. And you can see he's got light behind him, as well as some lights in the very corners of the frame that are on the front. And so traditionally, you want to set up your front lighting so that your face is exposed the way you would like. You want some shadows, but you don't want them to be too dark. And then the rear lights are really the accent lights. And those are the things that will light up some of your background or light across your shoulder. And they help separate you from the background so that you don't look two-dimensional. So the whole idea, you are presenting a two-dimensional image from a camera. You want your lighting to create those visual clues that you're a three-dimensional person. So those shadows are important, and those highlights, and it helps to create that professional image. So if you've got some nice light coming in, either through a window or from one of these soft boxes, or you're reflecting it off a white wall, it gives a nice, pleasing light. Keep the shadows, but don't make them too dark. And what I've done for my lighting setup here is the simplest of all. I've got a window to this side of me, and then I've got a piece of white foam core on the other side of me that's reflecting light in to kind of make these shadows not too dark. So this is as simple as it gets. If I were to do this off hours, I would do exactly as what's in this setup is I have a softbox. I have a light with a softbox. I would bring that in. I would use that as my key light or my front light. And then I would have a small light behind me. So there are ways to do it with natural light, as I'm doing for this webinar. It's less consistent than using studio light, but obviously it's very economical. So with just a piece of foam core or some kind of white wall or something as a reflector, you can get reasonably enough even light that it's not too distracting for people viewing. George, you've got really nice, even soft light. I can tell that's not pure window light. Why don't you describe your setup a little bit?
Yeah, definitely not. I do have a lot of ambient light coming in through two windows. They're actually in front of me, slightly off to the side, but those windows are north facing, and they also have a covered balcony in front of them. So I don't get actually a ton. It's very little ambient light coming in there. So I actually have 3 LED lights, not too dissimilar from this, a little different setup just due to my physical space, but I have 2 of them in front of me that are operating as key lights essentially. And for the most part, because I am getting that ambient light, I didn't want to point them at me, and they don't have soft boxes on them. I actually have them bouncing off my white ceiling to kind of fill in a little bit without blowing my face out completely. And then because I am using a green screen, one of the toughest things with green screens is shadows and making sure that green is evenly lit. So I actually have another LED light filling in the green screen so that the front lights and the ambient light isn't getting huge shadows from my head and shoulders in all kinds of weird directions. So that was actually inexpensive to add those 3 LED lights. Honestly, it was less than $100 to add those 3 LED lights to my space, and it gave me a ton of flexibility on how I could configure and set them up to make sure that I'm getting the right balance of all these different pieces.
Yep. One of the other things you'll notice when you start to set up lighting is both George and I are wearing glasses, and that can be problematic. So you do
all
need
the reflections, yeah.
Yeah. So depending on what angle your head is at, you may get some reflections. It's hard to eliminate that completely, but with some careful positioning of the lighting, you can reduce that greatly so that at least people can see your eyes. It's important that they're able to see your eyes, and it's not just a glowing reflection off your lenses. You want to make sure that they can see your eyes, and that doesn't become a distraction as well, especially if you're trying to communicate ideas and establish trust. It's very difficult to do it You wouldn't wear sunglasses for the same reason. If you're in that, you want people to be able to see your eyes. So just take care with your lighting. Choosing the right position and angle for that light can go a long way to reducing the glare. You're never going to eliminate it completely as you move around, but you can greatly reduce it to the point where it doesn't become a distraction for those who are watching. So
Absolutely. So we did have a slide up that we'll just touch on quickly, and for the last lighting there, and that's, we often talk about this. This is a pretty standard lighting principle for photography, video shoots, studio environments, and that's the 3-point lighting, and that's kind of, what we were talking about. This is, if you're going to invest in lighting, do a bit of reading on the 3-point lighting style setup. This is the very basic idea of having a backlight, a key light, and a fill light, and that'll go a long way to improving the look of your things. And obviously, there are tons of articles and information out there about 3-point lighting. So if you're investing in lighting, I would definitely do some reading on this, and then look at your physical space and figure out how to do it.
And if you have to start with 2, make sure it's the key and the fill, and then add the third one is the accent light. So you want to kind of, your key is the main light that you can't go without. The next light you add is your fill, and then if you can, add that third light as an accent or a background light, and that just helps to really round things out and separate you from the background.
Yeah. So the other one to consider is wardrobe, being careful what you wear. And this, doesn't mean only make sure you put on pants. It also means, if you're wearing a striped shirt or a checked shirt that's very fine patterns, very small detail, that's going to show up with a moire effect on video. And that's not going to look great when compression comes into play. Any video conferencing is going to be using compression. And so these things don't look great through a camera lens and compressed. So consider that. On the flip side of that, if you're using a green screen like I am, don't wear anything green. You probably can't really tell, but I have a green logo on my shirt. And, when I move that around, you can actually see the keyed out image through my chest because of that. And luckily, my framing cuts that logo out, but that's another important consideration. You need to pay attention, and obviously professionalism is one thing, but then there's also the how it looks on video is part of it as well. So those are the things really to look at. Avoid certain things, and make sure that it all lines up. So we did just put up a new poll asking the question, what is your biggest challenge when creating a better home video conferencing setup? That could be some of the things we have already talked about. It could be some of the things we're about to talk about. So weigh in on that as well.
One other thing I'll add to the wardrobe is just that lightly colored fabrics. They can look great in person, but often they'll look a little blown out, mean way too bright for the camera when you're, especially after compression. So white shirts or very light yellow shirts, those kind of things, they can look great in person, but they can look awful on video conference. So you really, again, light colors are not totally taboo like a keying color would be, but you just need to be careful that your lighting and your camera is going to present that well, because there are lots of times where you just see this glowing body because it's a white shirt and the light is just too bright, and the dynamic range is too great for the camera to adjust for, and it just blows the shirt right out. So do keep in mind that probably white is not the best color for getting on camera, unless you've really tweaked your lighting to accommodate for that.
Exactly. So the next one is a pretty big one, and ultimately sometimes can be the biggest challenge maybe, and that's your sound, your audio, your noise. We talked earlier off the top about, maybe it's just a question of background noise, but there also is just the natural environment noise. So maybe the room is particularly echoey, and then sound is just your voice is bouncing around. There's a lot of things to consider there, and you might want to consider trying to dampen some of that noise. And there's a lot of ways to do that. I honestly, in my home office here, have zero, and the echo can actually be bad sometimes. I don't have, like, my floors are not carpeted. I have basically nothing on the walls that absorb much sound. There's no soft furniture in the room. It's not a spare bedroom, so there's no bed or a mattress to absorb any sound. So it's pretty bouncy in here in terms of sound. So, I have to be somewhat careful about where I position things and how I fine tune gain and things like that on my audio, and make sure that I'm closer to the mic and bring the gain down and stuff like that. But if you do want to deaden it, there's lots of ways you can do that. You can do it on the cheap with curtains, carpets, furniture, sound deadening blankets, moving blankets, that kind of thing. You could go the old school egg carton thing if you want. And of course, they do make specific sound deadening panels, whether it's the soft foam ones like you see in the lower left of this slide, or we have a picture here of our old demo studio in our office where we had one of our staff who's a trained audio engineer go in there, measure and do precise design of where to place sound absorbing material panels on the walls in specific patterns and in specific locations to kill the reflectivity of that room. And it's impossible to even describe in words the night and day difference that makes. And so those gray panels you see on the walls, those are specific sound absorbing panels that are positioned in ways. When we first set up that room, it was so reflective. You'd go in there, you'd clap. It was like yelling into a canyon. It just echoed and bounced around for days. After that, it was just dead. Nothing bounced around. Super soft. It was great. It was great. So, a lot of people will do the sound deadening thing. If you look at people who do podcasts and stuff like that, they'll have the soft panels on the walls and stuff like that because they care more about audio than video in those instances, and rightly so. So you could make a small investment in some panels, to reduce some of that reflectivity. If you're going to invest in it, though, you might want to invest in the ones that are specifically designed for it. If you're going to do it on the cheap, then try work with what you got. Mattresses and curtains and so on. The heavier, the better.
Yeah, it's amazing what a difference it makes when you walk into a room that's been treated versus one that has not. It's night and day, not just for the person in the room, but especially for after compression and everything, people on the other end of that video conference, what they hear from a room that's very lively and has tons of reflections is not nice to listen to. And just a little bit of care to kind of take care of that goes a long way to getting rid of those distractions for people. So it's something that's worth doing. It doesn't have to be super expensive. It doesn't have to be very time consuming either. But it is a very worthwhile thing to look at. It's one of the first things you should do in your environment. Probably getting that sound to be reasonable in the room is the first thing you should do. And then once you've got that licked, then you can start to look at lighting and other things.
Yeah, so I was just looking at chat here, and that's why my head's turned. So I apologize. I'm looking at my other monitor at chat here, and a few people brought up some great points, and Brad brought up one here just a moment ago. My biggest challenge is that most of the people we're bringing into video conferencing for a live interview are not tech savvy at all. They wouldn't be able to figure out how to plug in a USB webcam. I'm sorry.
Yep.
So I'm dealing with a lot of default laptop webcam, crap audio, etc. There's a lot of education that needs to be done on framing, especially. Not many folks understand the value of being properly framed. Also the challenge of connectivity, lots of bad Wi-Fi connections. Brad, I 100% agree. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons why we're doing these webinars, and we've been doing so many of them, and we've done variations of this one in a few different ways, hoping that putting this material out there for you and something you can share. These are recorded, will be posted for VOD after the fact, is something that's going to be usable to share with people, to help educate people on the ways. Because as we said off the top, to a certain extent, a lot of what we're forced into doing now is not going to go away when this is over. A lot of people are going to be doing this going forward, at least part-time, if not permanently. So, now is the time to educate and improve things so that going forward, you're ready. And someone did mention, Andy mentioned that, the Zoom virtual background requires relatively powerful computer to work effectively. Yeah, that's partially true. The better the camera, the easier it is, and the better the background, the easier it is on the computer. Admittedly, just due to my hobbies at home, I'm sitting here on a pretty powerful gaming computer, so none of these things are a big issue for me, but that's, different. And he was also mentioning that Teams is adding a background blurring and virtual backgrounds, but they only use stock images now. They're adding custom in the future. And I think that's going to be true of a lot of conferencing tools. So that's good. So let's jump into the next part, and that is really about your questions. So I'm going to be going through the Q&A panel here. So if you have a specific question, throw it in the Q&A panel. You'll notice there's also an upvote thing, Reddit style, on those Q&As. So feel free to use that to upvote things. And please weigh in on the polls as well. And again, the last one we put up was, what are the challenges you're facing? Throw those in as questions after you weigh in, and we'd love to help you out with that. So let's look at some Q&A. So the first one, and I actually started talking about this earlier from Daryl, was talking about churches and live streaming and stuff like that. And like I said, it wasn't exactly on topic for today, Daryl, but please reach out to us. Send us an email, info@epiphan.com, and we'd be happy to engage with you and talk more about that subject in depth. We do have some previous webinars specifically on that. So check out epiphan.com/webinars and go through the back catalog, and there's a ton of information in there. So feel free to check that out. We did do some specifically on churches and live streaming. So if you're someone who's in that market looking to improve that, and many people are today, it's mind-boggling how many churches are trying to do exactly that. We've tried to put out some content there to assist you, so take a look at it. All right, so first question I'm going to take a look at here was from Melody, saying, what is the name of the external webcam microphone that you're using, and how much are they? So we addressed that a little bit as we were going through some of this. I know you asked this quite a while ago. Dave's using a Panasonic camcorder through one of our AVIO capture cards. I'm using a Sony a5100 running through a capture card again, and using that. Audio-wise, I'm using a Blue Yeti Nano USB microphone, which is a condenser microphone. Just connects over USB. Honestly, I can only really tell you prices in Canadian dollars, so they're going to sound way more expensive than they will be if you're in the US. But typically, Blue Yeti Nano, which is the cheaper of the Blue Yeti line. There's the Nano, the Blue Yeti, and they have a bigger one now. The Nano retails for about $120 Canadian. If you can get a good price on it, can be as much as $140. But that's a fairly average price for an upper tier one. You can get super cheap ones as well, down in the $40, $50 range. And Dave, you're using a different microphone.
Yeah, I've got one that's really meant for video conferencing, actually. And what I like about that is it sits flat on my desk. And so I don't need a boom arm or something to hold the mic. It's meant to be flat on a table or on a desk. So it's USB based as well. It's actually made by Clear One. And it's built to be part of a video conferencing system. And I've just taken it and I plug it directly into my laptop here, and it works quite well. So I use that because I don't want to have a boom arm and be worried about the placement of the mic. It doesn't give quite as good audio as it would if I had that mic placed exactly where it should be, but it does get it away from my laptop, away from my camera, and it's good enough to give me good quality sound and give me kind of no fuss. It's very easy to use.
Yeah, exactly. So those are another option. There's a lot of lav mics as well that are out there. That would be another recommendation, I would say. Those can be handy. Just clip them to your lapel or your shirt.
Yeah, especially if you have background noise. I'm in an environment where it's fairly quiet, but the lav mics do a really good job of really picking up the voice only and not so much of the distracting sounds that are around them. Zoom does a pretty good job of cutting out some of that background noise. So depending on the conferencing software you're using and what else you're using the microphone for, you need to look out for that. But yeah, the lapel mics are sometimes a little more expensive, but they do a really good job of cutting down the sound. So if you're in an environment where you just can't avoid, buses going by on the street or other things being picked up, sometimes a lav mic is the best choice.
I would also recommend, if you don't mind the visual of it, a headset with a boom. If you spend a decent amount of money on those, around the $100 mark, I would say, those are excellent. And once you get to that $100 price point, which I know is not cheap, but when you get to that, around that level, the boom mics usually have a noise canceling secondary mic to them to read the outside and kill it. So that can be an excellent choice as well, as long as you don't mind the visual of big cans and the boom mic, which, like I say, I use day to day in meetings all the time. I switched to the Yeti for webinars because I want a more clean look for this type of content. But for just meetings and phone calls, I just use the boom mic. Bruno was asking, without endorsing, which brands or models gives you the best quality for the money in a decent setup? So if we're talking about a decent setup, or if you're referring to our tiers, the serviceable, the decent, and the pro, in the decent, if we're talking about a USB webcam, honestly, the Logitech stuff is great if you can get your hands on it. And I saw someone mentioned in chat earlier, getting your hands on some of the most popular webcam models right now is extremely difficult, and the prices got inflated due to a huge rush of people going out and buying them up due to the current conditions. So that's a tough one. I do use and have used, before I switched to the camera and capture card, I was using a Logitech C920. Nothing wrong with that camera. If you can, previously I would have said, if you can catch it on sale, it's a fantastic buy for that type of thing. The Logitech C922 is a kind of one step up from that. Also a great choice. The Logitech Brio, if you want to spend $200 on a webcam, you can do that. It's a good camera, but if you're spending $200, you might as well go the extra, if you want my opinion. Webcams really can be a get what you pay for scenario for a USB webcam. You can buy cheaper ones. They're maybe not as good of a job. There's some out there that Razer, which is a gaming company, makes that have a built-in ring light on them. It's a cool gimmick because the ring light is adjustable and stuff, which is nice for lighting, but the actual sensor is not great in that camera, and it's the same price as a Logitech. So, you have to decide where you want to place your money. I think if starting at the Logitech C920 and going up from there in the Logitech line, you absolutely cannot go wrong if you're looking at a USB webcam. But there's other options as well. Audio-wise, if I'm applying that same thing, again, I mean, I think if you're looking at, USB microphones, looking at condenser mics, cardioid condenser mics, if they have adjustable patterns, that's good. The Blue Yeti stuff is a traditional one that's been around forever. Everyone uses it, but tons of people make competing devices to that. Rode makes them with their NT series. Audio Technica with the 2020 makes some fantastic ones as well. But any of these kind of traditional audio companies, Blue kind of started more in the USB space, but have grown into the more professional audio. But a lot of the professional traditional audio, like the Rhodes and the Audio Technicas and those guys, they all make USB mics now that are based on their, analog condenser mic tech that they've just put USB devices into them. So I don't think you can go wrong with any of those. Let's see. Frank asked that question in there as well. Will I find much improvement in the 4K webcam over an HD model? I think we addressed that earlier. And if we're talking specifically about a 4K webcam, like the Brio, honestly, I would say not really. I think if you go to a 4K mirrorless camera, like the Panasonic G7 or the Canon G7X, potentially, yeah, especially with interchangeable lenses. Yeah, I think you could, because again, you can get optical zoom on those, and that might be a benefit. Yeah, and again, Bruno kind of commented in response there, 4K takes a lot of bandwidth. Yes, if you're actually streaming or trying to do things in full 4K, that's true. Conferencing tools don't use 4K at the moment. They're going to scale it down and they're going to compress it. So it's not really going to use any additional bandwidth in that regard, but you could. So we'll get rid of that one. With the pro setup, Robert asked this one, with a pro setup, how would you address latency issues? Dave, do you want to maybe address that? I'm guessing they mean through the capture card.
Yeah, and some cameras will have some latency just straight out of the HDMI cable before you even get to the capture card. So there are some tools for live streaming which have already built in kind of latency compensation things, because typically if you're using a USB mic or an analog mic, that signal will be very fast in terms of getting to the conference software. It's a faster path than your video path, which is coming from your video camera. Many video cameras, even the expensive ones, we have a Canon C100, has 2 or 3 frames at least, maybe 4 of delay on the HDMI output. So I know for the streaming software, there's already things built into OBS and hardware encoders and things where you can adjust that delay. I'm not aware of similar things inside of Zoom and other ones. So that one's a tricky one. There are some analog tools you can buy. I'm trying to remember, I think Behringer had one, and there are a few around that are basically analog delay devices that you can put into the path of your audio to kind of slow it down or delay it to line up better with your video. So there are some hardware tools you can put in place to do that. But unfortunately, I'm not aware of anything in Zoom or Skype or the like that allows that adjustment just yet. So if it's
in my general experience, using USB audio devices in combination with external, whether it's a webcam or whether it's a camera through a capture card, I honestly haven't experienced any latency issues. There could be, depending on the devices you use, but in general, most cameras have very minimal latency over HDMI, and most capture cards, depending on the capture card, I can only really speak to ours. Our AVIO capture cards, their latency is typically 1 or 2 frames. So most of the time that's small enough that no one's going to notice. If you're concerned about that, some cameras can have an analog audio input. The Panasonic G7 and the Canon G7 both have analog 3.5 millimeter inputs on them. So if you're using an analog microphone that you could plug in to the camera directly and then send it out over HDMI to unify the signal, that can help sometimes as well. But then you're into a different world of choosing what audio device you want to use. There again, you might want to use a wireless lav just to free yourself up a little bit. Dan was asking, how do you position the external camera if you want it seated looking straight on? So Dave and I kind of answered this earlier. We both have tripods sitting behind our main monitors pointed at us. If you're the kind of person who likes your monitor way up high, that can be a challenge. If you're using a laptop and it's down and it's angled, that won't be a problem at all. Then, that's easy. For me, I do have my monitor fairly high. And again, this is where using an external camera that uses an optical zoom can help. My Sony camera that you're looking at me through right now is actually zoomed in quite a bit. If I zoomed it out, you would see the edge of the green screen, a little bit of the room behind me, and the back of my monitor. But I can position it, zoom in just so to cut all of that out, and I can sit here fairly naturally and look at the camera lens with keeping my head up a little bit. So it's trial and error, to be honest, but tripod behind your desk, which means, like I did, you might have to reorient your room to get the space behind your desk, and then just point it at your face, and then play with the zoom and the framing to cut out any excess if you want. Brad asking a question, do I recommend this competitor's product? No. Sorry, that's going to be a biased opinion, Brad. But no, I don't. I'm not going to recommend a competitor's product. um, but we have a product, the AVIO series, that does exactly the same job that those do, but it's not made of plastic. That's all I'm going to say.
I noticed one question was asking, what's the advantage of an external capture card like our AVIO versus something like the software that Canon just released, to be able to bring those signals in?
That's an awesome question, actually. Dave, I don't know if you've experimented with it yet at all. I haven't, but I have read up on a few things on it. So the first thing is that Canon software that they released. I'm super impressed that Canon did that, and that's awesome. I love that they did that. It's been a long time coming, and you'll see the reviews on it. Everybody in the streaming community has said, oh, thank God, this has been
finally
forever. That's insane that this hasn't been there from day one. From as soon as they put a USB port on a camera, this should have always been a thing. And I agree with that statement. Downsides to the way Canon did it. Number one, that software is in beta and is buggy. Number two, there have been some compatibility issues with different software. Number three, not all Canon cameras are compatible, and not all Canon cameras that are compatible do the same thing through that software. It still varies by model. Some of them scale it way down. So you get this camera that by itself natively could shoot 4K, then you run it through the software and you get 360p out of it because that's all it can do. That's a big letdown to me. So, it depends on the camera you have. Are there advantages of using the external capture devices as opposed to the software? I think yes. One, you can change cameras. You have more options for cameras, but not just cameras. You can plug other video devices into a capture card and use those. So maybe one day part of your presentation, you need to show an application to train someone on something that runs on your iPad. You could plug an HDMI output from your iPad into your capture card and show that instead. You could plug in another computer as another input. So the capture card is significantly more flexible. The Canon software, and again, all credit to Canon, and as Danny just said in chat, they're not quite ready for prime time to take over what hardware can do because there's too much variability there. And I agree with that. But if you're in a pinch and you have one of the well-supported Canon models, go for it.
Work. Yeah. The other element to look at is just the compression that's going to happen. Is coming out of the camera. Those USB ports were typically not designed to handle full motion video at HD or above. So they are going to do compression, much like a webcam does. You notice almost all of the webcams out there are USB 2, not USB 3, and that the reason is because they all do motion JPEG compression.
Yeah.
If you're using an external capture card with an HDMI, that HDMI is uncompressed because it's got to be able to be plugged directly into a monitor or a TV. There's no decompression there. So that is pure video signal. It's running for an HD signal at 30 frames is about 3 gigabits per second at 60 frames. So you're not going to get that across your Canon link.
No.
It's going to be compressed. So you're effectively taking your signal, compressing it, then you get to the computer, decompressing it, then putting it into Zoom, which is recompressing it. So from an image quality point of view as well, the capture cards just do have that ability to bring in directly off of HDMI, which is completely uncompressed, and feed that over USB 3 into your computer, assuming you have a USB 3 port available. Then you'll get a completely uncompressed image coming into your software.
Similar, like we were saying earlier, start as great and as the best you can. Yes, it's going to get knocked down a little bit further in the chain, but don't trip yourself up by starting mediocre, trying to go up and then come back down to bad again, because that never works out. The double compression thing, like Dave was saying, is just not great. It's one of the reasons why IP cameras don't make our list of things to choose, because although many of them can, through software, can be brought in as webcams, you're doing the same double compression again, and it's not a great way to do things.
Yep.
So
And that compression will generally introduce some latency as well.
Exactly.
So, coming straight out over HDMI is usually the best option there.
The shortest path.
and scaling is another one. So when you're going into the conferencing application, you may be bringing in highest quality signal, which is great. It's going to get scaled when you get into your conferencing application. And with some hardware capture cards, they're able to do that scaling in the hardware itself. So that, again, just relieves the burden on your PC to be able to do things like your virtual background and other things that you want to be doing with your laptop rather than scaling. So some of the capture cards, including ours, will do that hardware scaling. So it will negotiate with the application, which is your conferencing, to say what is the image size you require and the frame rate you require and that kind of thing. And it will adapt that signal in hardware and pass it with very, very low latency. So those are some of the advantages to go into a hardware route.
Yeah. Jason also asked about audio sync issues and how we're handling them. I think we answered that already, Jason. So I hope you heard that. Generally, there aren't any, but you kind of have to look at your setup if you're experiencing that. Vicky was asking, what's the best way to control lighting in an open environment? So if you're in a bigger space and you need to control lighting, I would seriously look at using the LED panels that have Wi-Fi control built into them. And there are many of these, because then you can remotely control them. If something changes, you don't have to run around changing all of it. If they have that level of control, it also usually means they have brightness and color temperature, excellent control, so that you can fine tune your camera white balance to match your light white temperature and just get everything perfect. That makes it very easy for one person to control if you go that way. But if you're talking about controlling natural lighting, you can't.
It's harder. It's definitely harder. One thing you can do with the artificial lights is get a larger light, meaning something that's diffused and larger, and bring it close to you, because the amount of light that strikes your face is going to fall off very rapidly with distance. And so if you're worried about the environmental light that's in that big open space, the closer your artificial lights are to you, the more they're having the effect of the lighting that your camera is seeing, and the less you're getting that ambient light mixed in. So pulling those close to you and providing nice diffuse light in close is going to help as much as possible to mitigate. So if you're in an environment with lots of ambient light, the further you place your lights away, the more powerful they need to be to deal with that ambient light. So pull them in as close as you can without them being in the frame. And that will give you at least the best chance to kind of combat whatever ambient light and other things are going on in that environment.
Yeah. Bruno asked the question, which category would a GoPro fall into in terms of camera quality? So that could be a tricky one, because it can also depend on how you're using the GoPro. Most GoPros from the 3 forwards did have an HDMI output you could run into a capture card. Some of them will allow you to mount over USB as a webcam. Personally, GoPro is one of my least favorite camera choices, partly because yes, you can change the field of view, but if you don't, I personally hate the fisheye look. Yes, you can change the field of view, but the GoPros have a very small sensor size, and they're built to do a specific job. And outside of that specific job, I personally don't like the way they look. There's minimal control over white balance. There's no control over, ISO and aperture and all these other things. If you're going to spend $500 or $600 on a GoPro, which is what the newest ones cost, or even $300 or $400 on a previous gen, or $200 on a used one, I don't see it as a value proposition at all, when the same money could get you a Sony A5100 and way, way better visual.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, they're action cameras, and that's what they do really well. What you're paying for there is their ability to,
they're small, they're awesome in that regard.
Small, they're light, they're great for that kind of thing. You can strap them to your ski helmet or whatever.
Yeah.
They're perfect for that. But the trade-off is the image quality, that fisheye look when you're trying to up your game in terms of how your video conferencing signal looks. That's almost, I would say, a step backwards from what's in your laptop already.
Yeah, I think even if you fix the field of view and narrow it to its tightest, which is you're really dealing with something that's going to produce USB webcam level of quality for a significantly higher price.
A lot more money.
And I'm not sure that that's really worth it. Now, that being said, there are environments where a GoPro can be great. Cameron, our producer, actually had our God view back of the studio behind the scenes shot. That's coming from a GoPro mounted on the wall. That's a great usage of a GoPro because you're so far back and you want the wide angle that it doesn't matter. But if I was shooting myself, unless I had a physical limitation of not being able to use a tripod, and I was basically going to stick the GoPro mount to the top of my monitor, and I needed something that the GoPro does exceptionally well, I would put them into the, I guess, the decent category, but for the money compared to a webcam, I'm not sure it's worth it.
Yeah, if you've already got one, use it in a pinch, but sure, I wouldn't go buy a hero cam.
Yeah, to a degree, a lot of this is, run what you brung kind of thing. If you have it, use it, and then maybe consider upgrading later.
Yep.
Melody was asking, is it better to use a white or a green cloth for a virtual background? Zoom's virtual background replacement can actually do it on anything as long as it's solid, but it works best with a green screen or a blue screen, which is the traditional keying colors from Hollywood movies, if you will. So while it can do it on a solid white wall, it won't be as precise. The algorithm won't be as precise. And you'll notice that most around the edges of people. Especially if you wear a headset where you'll see the gaps of their headset along the side of their head, that won't be filled. And so you'd see through that and it kind of looks blocky and weird. If you use a green screen and turn it on that way, it's almost flawless. It sharpens it up extremely, extremely well. So green or blue, if you're actually going to do background replacement and keying, green or blue is the way to go for sure. If you're using white, you're really doing a luminance replacement, if you want to get technical on it, and it works, but it's usually not as accurate.
And you will run into issues with things like, again, we talked about trying to arrange your lighting so that you have minimal reflections in glasses and things, but they are going to occur. And generally, your lights are white, and when they reflect in your glasses, they look white. So if you're keying white, you got to be very careful because there's lots of things in your environment that can reflect in your glasses or in your clothing, other things. And depending on, what else is in your set, white is a more difficult thing to avoid from a wardrobe and reflections and all that kind of stuff than is, something like green.
As they call it, chroma green or chroma blue are specifically chosen for good reason. So yeah, that's definitely the better way to go.
Yep.
Vic is asking how to handle sound with a very high ceiling, 12-foot ceilings and plaster walls. You got to get something on the walls and ideally something on the ceiling to deaden that down.
There are what they call sound clouds that are basically diffusion and absorption materials that hang from the ceiling. So that is generally the way to go with large ceilings, but also just making sure what's really problematic is the direct reflections coming in. So if you're able to make sure that things aren't going directly up and down, and when they're going down, you have soft material like carpet and other things on the floor, that will help to reduce how many times things reflect back and forth. But if you really want high quality stuff with high ceilings, you're going to want stuff on the walls, and
baffles in the ceiling.
Baffles in the ceiling will go a long way. And really what you're trying to do is just break up those standing waves that will bounce back and forth between the floor and the ceiling. And putting anything up there that will break those up is helpful, and putting something that will absorb that is even better. So that can get expensive, though. Those absorption clouds, they call them, are not an inexpensive solution, but they work extremely well.
We've done it with literally just hanging blankets in loops on a ceiling, right? So you can do it. There's ways to do it on the cheap, but yeah, that's one of the most challenging environments with high ceilings for sure. Although it's not put in here, we do have Brian ask this question. I know he just asked it, but I wanted to address it very, very quickly because it's an easy one. Do you have a representative in Calgary? Yes, Brian, our Canadian partner and distributor, Data Visual, they do have reps in Calgary and would be happy to help you with any of our products. If you go to our website, epiphan.com, you'll see a where to buy section. It'll give you the contact information for Data Visual. They are our Canadian partners and distributors. They are awesome to work with. So check them out and they can help you out there in Calgary. All right. Is it possible to set up in a small space, 2 meter by front to back, with a mirrorless camera and a 3-light setup? Yes, I think so. The distance from my wall, which is actually a couple of feet behind my camera, to my green screen here that I can touch leaning back, I'm touching it right now, is probably less than 2 meters, or just 2 meters. So yes, it's absolutely possible. I have more space behind my green screen, but if I didn't, if it was smaller, I would have just pinned it straight to the wall. It's on a stand instead that I can move, but I would just pin it straight to the wall and set things up that way. I could push the camera farther back to the wall in front of me if I needed to. So yeah, it's definitely possible. The 3-light setup I'm doing, this kind of leads into the next one on budget LEDs for the green screen that Seth asked. The one screen that's kind of throwing light up onto, you can kind of see the shadow I can create by putting my hand in front of the LED light. It's hard to see on the crop I have right now, but literally one of the small LED panels is on the floor immediately beside me. And that's just throwing in some fill on the green screen. So you can kind of see the shadow I throw up there, putting my hand in front of it. The other two are at the same distance as my camera from me. And they're, like I say, they're primarily filling. I'm breaking some of the 3-point rules a little bit just because the limited space I have. Because I have a white ceiling, they're primarily just bouncing off the ceiling and onto me. Otherwise, the mix of natural light and those would blow me out completely. So all the LED lights I have are dimmable as well. So, I can adjust that if I need to. And most of them are not at max brightness, not even close. One of them is at minimum brightness, actually. So yeah, it's definitely possible to do it with a 3-light setup in a limited space. You could either mount them to the walls, or you could try to get the smallest stands that you can, to try to not have tripping hazards so your at-home health and safety people freak out. And then the last question there was suggestion on budget LED lights to use with a green screen. It's not specific to green screens. The ones I'm using are a very inexpensive. Two of the ones I have are a very inexpensive 2-light kit. The panels are only about this big. They were very inexpensive on Amazon. They're dimmable, but they don't have any temperature control, but they did come with some colored gels, so I can kind of play with colored lighting a little bit. They came with their own very basic stands. So one of them is on the floor. One of them I actually have on a shelf. The other light I have is a higher end light. I actually wouldn't have to go that high end. Honestly, if you look up LED panel lights on Amazon, there are so many of them. I would say as long as it's dimmable, but ideally has some temperature control, is nice. If it comes with a softbox, that's great too. But there's a huge range of stuff. You can get kits for $60, $100, $300. It's a question of what you want to spend, but with or without stands. It's hard to point you to a specific one, but there's tons of options out there. Let's see. So we're just going to look at chat. That was everything that was in our Q&A panel. So if anyone still has any questions from the Q&A panel, throw it in there. I'm just going to look through chat here for a second and see if there's anything there that I might want to look at. I noticed someone earlier was mentioning they use a Roland V1 HD switcher plugged into an AVIO, and they love how it works.
Awesome.
That's an awesome example of a way to really elevate your game, to bring multi-cameras, switching, and all of that into your environment, which, is one of the things I've been experimenting with. I didn't really do it today, but it's one of the things I've been experimenting with here, because I have a kind of similar setup that I've been playing with, since I have all these cameras sitting in my desk. You might as well play with them. And I think that leads to another point, though, is that if you're in a business where you need to demonstrate physical products, physical items, that's the kind of setup you might want to consider. Multiple cameras, whether it's an overhead shot and a face cam, and you just switch between those two to show stuff, that elevates the quality of your content in a big way. So those are things to consider. The Roland V1 is not a cheap switcher, although it's awesome and I love it. I totally agree with you. It's not an inexpensive one, but it does have some great pieces to it as well that can be helpful. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Danny was just saying cheap DIY absorption, thrift store blankets and comforters. Yeah, exactly. Go buy them for pennies and slap them on the walls, right?
Yeah. Old mattresses do a great job too. Putting those, just lean them up against the wall vertically.
Yeah, you can go to maybe not right now, depending on where you live, but you could go to the craft fabric store and just buy, foam, and use that. There's lots of ways to do it. I've seen people who go to, for us, Canadian Tire, and go buy the super cheap camping sleep pads, because they're that same dimpled kind of foam, and just roll that out and stick it to the wall. There's lots of ways you can do it. Another question just popped up in Q&A. I was waiting for this one, Dave. We mentioned this in our green room beforehand. Can a Pearl Mini be used with Zoom as well as providing a streaming solution? I'll let you take that one, Dave.
So it can. George and I were chatting about this earlier, because a Pearl Mini allows for that switching capability, that multi-camera capability that we just talked about. Someone had the Roland plugged in instead. Pearl offers that, but it offers a lot more. And as this question asks, it can stream directly as well. So if you're going into conferencing, but you also want to, say, stream out to YouTube or to Crowdcast or something else, it does have that ability to do that. So Pearl Mini will allow you to bring in multiple cameras, switch in between them, and stream out to, CDNs or wherever you'd like to go. And then basically you take the HDMI output from the Pearl Mini, feed it through one of the capture cards, and bring it into your Zoom. So it's not the most economical way to create just an HDMI switcher, as we talked about. But if you are doing other things like streaming in parallel, it makes a really good solution for that. So if you are looking to stream in parallel with your conferencing, Pearl Mini does a great job of that.
Exactly. If you're looking for a more multi-use scenario, and maybe more, it's not a home office, but maybe a home studio kind of thing, or even in the office, when we get back to that, you need a small studio space there, then yes, that's exactly where a Pearl Mini can really shine, because it gives you so much customizable mixing and switching, streaming and recording, while simultaneously you could still run the HDMI out to a capture card and in. But it doesn't mount over USB the way a capture card does on its own. It still has to do it through a video signal like HDMI. So, that's one thing to keep in mind. So again, multi-use, you can probably make a very strong argument for it, and I would agree with it 100%. But as an example, I don't have a Pearl Mini in my home because I don't need that multi-use. I'm not running the stream from my home. If I was, that would be different, but I don't. So, yeah, it really depends on your setup, Dave. So if you want to discuss more about that, feel free to send us an email to info@epiphan.com, and we're happy to chat with you about all of these things, all of our products, whether it's AVIO capture cards or pearls or whatever you like, and the scenario that you have. Today, we've primarily talked about the AVIO capture cards, and you can find those on our website, at epiphan.com/product/AVIO HD or 4K. And of course, you can always send us an email, like I just said, info@epiphan.com. And I think that's where we're going to wrap it up today. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Really appreciate it. I hope this was educational and that it helped inspire you to go forth and build the most awesome home setup that you can, and really blow all of your coworkers and customers and everyone out of the water with how impressed they'll be with your awesome setups. That's really what it's all about, because when you're up here, people want to deal with you. So great. Thanks so much, Dave, for joining me. That was awesome. And we have more webinars coming up. There is one tomorrow on education stuff. I'm really bad at remembering all the subjects, but we do have another webinar coming up tomorrow. So visit epiphan.com/webinars for previous and upcoming webinars. We always have our live show, Live at Epiphan, every Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern, where we cover all kinds of different topics. This week, I think we are talking about, on the live show on Thursday, we're talking about fitness classes and live streaming those, which has become another huge boom industry. And saw an article just yesterday saying some trainers aren't going back, they're staying digital. And then tomorrow's webinar, thanks Cameron, Mr. Producer. Tomorrow's webinar is discussing hardware encoding versus software encoding in education. And that's a huge, huge hot topic as well. So this week, the three kind of shows, the two webinars and our weekly live show are all hitting some pretty hot topics. So join us for all of those. Once again, all of our previous webinars, which we've been doing this since early March, every week, pretty much. So there's a pretty good back catalog now. There's probably a subject matter that would interest you. Go check those out, epiphan.com/webinars, and hopefully you find something useful there. For now, that's it. Thanks so much. We'll see you later.
Take care.